Hello. The European Union. I have a little question mark on Britain because I don't even know if Boris Johnson can tell us what's going on there anymore. But basically, the European Union, I live in it. And as much as I would love to continue living in it, it seems that though I might not be the one moving away from the European Union, but rather that it will move away from me. Political loopholes, bureaucracy, and a feeling of the people that they do not have control over this political institution anymore have established to even the most traditional of supporters of the EU that reform is no longer a choice, but rather a necessity. Jean Monnet said, "The European Union will be forged in crisis and will be the sum of the solutions adopted for these crises." Europe still finds itself in a crisis now. Last year, I was almost faced with its near destruction as anti-establishment parties were swept Europe and started talking about ways in which they could destroy it. And I went into the full attack, going into the YouTube comments and just destroying people on how the European Union is perfect and not caring about their opinions. However, after the dust had settled, the European Union's survival had been established for at least 4 more years. I looked back and actually looked at the way the European Union is constructed, and I saw it wasn't as perfect as I thought it would be. And though I would like to stand here and tell you all the reforms necessary for the EU, expose you to my 17-year-old political genius, I thought that instead I would look back. History is the world's library, a library that grows more every single day. And Europe has access to that library. So I decided I will instead look at history and the solutions that were established for these different empires in different places, and the way Europe can actually get lessons from this history in order to help its development. So starting us off, the first historical event, German unification. Well, not that German unification, this German unification. So we can learn here how centralization of maybe the government and the economy can now have more benefits rather than create more problems. So right after the Napoleonic Wars, Germany was swept by and destroyed, and from the ashes the German Federation was established, a trade organization and basically the Holy Roman Empire renamed. But what happened was this union was still not very centralized. In 1819, they established the Zollverein, which was an economic union that allowed for Prussia and the southern European states to have many economic benefits, as there was a free flow of money, allowing for the southern European states to industrialize more, while Prussia had more access to the resources it was necessary to keep up its economic machine. And though right here, we already see a bunch of benefits that the European Union could have, as this was basically a European Union structure just for Germany, we have to remember it wasn't until Germany became an empire that it became a central governmental and economic center of the world. So maybe the lessons Europe can see here is firstly, a more centralized economy could be better as it'll allow for the free flow of money. We see countries like Greece that now are pushed back and anchored by these immense loans that it's holding, keeping its economy down. But if there was the free flow of money, allowing for these countries to actually develop and actually benefit the EU, that could create a lot of benefits. Furthermore, we can see how centralization of the government could have many benefits as well, as it would remove immense bureaucracy that's keeping the European Union from being an influential player on the world stage, and mostly it will give it legitimacy. As you may currently know, no one can vote for the EU president due to the looseness of the political system. However, with the centralization, we can have people actually voting for the EU Commission's president, thus creating a more legitimate government and a place in which the people feel as if they're more involved with the government. Now, the next event I will look at is the Great Depression, or more so the way that America dealt with the Great Depression. Now, one of the ways it dealt with it was the establishment of cooperative federalism, which isn't talked about very oftenly. And cooperative federalism is more oftenly known as marble cake federalism due to the close working between the federal and state governments. Basically, this means that the federal government would give money to the states in order to develop. However, it will strictly monitor the way in which that money was utilized in order to ensure that those states would develop and actually work towards benefiting the American economy. Something similar needs to happen in Europe because as you know, in the Eurozone crisis, one of the main problems was that one country was giving a bunch of little countries a lot of money, and then that money was disappearing. So basically, because I'm not allowed to denounce any governments in my TED Talk, I will not mention any of the Southern European states, especially not Spain and Italy, and definitely not Greece. Not going to name them. So basically what we see here is that if there was actually monitoring of the European government on how that money was actually being instituted, we could see these governments actually taking this money and utilizing it in a way that could actually benefit their governments and subsequently benefit the European government as a whole. Furthermore, if I had to give my very own suggestion, and it's a pretty ambitious suggestion, but an actually European judiciary that specifically goes towards looking at corruption cases and large corruption cases of politicians and people around Europe. Because if we look at the very corrupt countries, what would happen is that these judges and these prosecutors are not paid enough to actually risk their lives to prosecute a corrupt politician, in which the next day they would just get shot if they said the person was guilty. So we need these highly educated, well-paid judiciary in the European Union to make sure that these countries destroy corruption and thus start developing their economies more and helping Europe as a whole. Now I'm going to look back at German unification, but this time I'm going to look at the military aspect of the German unification and how a centralized military, as ambitious as it sounds and as skeptical as you may be to it, can have many benefits for Europe. So setting the stage, and during the Napoleonic Wars, Prussia, which is very commonly was called the military with the state, not the state with a military, was completely destroyed by a centralized French military. And what happened was, not even 100 years later, once the Germans had made a cooperated military movement into France, you saw this happen. And that is the Germans declaring a German empire in the Palace of Versailles. So what can we get from here? And it is that a centralized military is very powerful. However, that is not very relevant in the modern world. We will not see large powers going into war with each other, hopefully. And so basically what this means is that a centralized military can more so be a diplomatic tool. As unfortunate as it is, large militaries are still one of the most powerful diplomatic tools. So if we had a centralized military in, let's say, Estonia, which I haven't picked for any specific reason except that it borders Russia, and we put that army there, we could see that Russia, as a bigger country, will no longer look to the Westerners as if it actually wants to go into Estonia, because there will be a large military there stopping it from doing that, thus ensuring peace. Furthermore, a centralized military could act as a power balance to America and NATO. And funnily enough, as I mentioned NATO, many people when thinking about a European army will think, well, doesn't that already exist with America? It's called NATO. What I'm talking about here is not a European NATO, as that would be redundant and not necessary. I'm talking about an actual centralized military that could act as a power balance to America, could also act as a diplomatic tool, and could give Europe a lot of influence that it currently doesn't share with these much larger militaries, which all mostly come from federal governments. Moving on, another lesson from history that Europe can learn from is in fact the cultural differences in the cultural soup that is America. And we can learn how we can deal with immigration here in Europe. Though I want to start off by saying I understand in a way why the more industrial, more economically powerful countries such as Germany and France might be skeptical towards actually having a lot of immigrants and taking them in. However, if we look at smaller countries, I'm going to take Bulgaria as an example. Our population is decreasing very rapidly. However, we still want to have our economy growing. Well, in order to have an economy that's growing, you need a workforce to sustain that economy. And if our population keeps decreasing as drastically as it is, then we wouldn't have the resources to actually help our economy grow, and we wouldn't even have the resources to sustain the little economy that we already have. So we have hundreds of abandoned villages in which these immigrants can live in. So it's not as if we don't have space. They can actually help us actually boost our economy, could help us have a better image on the world stage. Yet instead of that, we have a wall on our border that Trump would be jealous of. So moving forward, the final lesson that Europe can take from history is indeed the fall of empires. Whether it be here we can learn the way in which Europe can deal with the different array of different cultures that exist on this continent. Whether it be the British Empire, the Russian Empire, or even Yugoslavia, which isn't an empire, the moment that these countries began falling apart, or these empires began falling apart, was when culture was being suppressed. Europe has a wide diversity of cultures, and actually telling these people that they have to condense their culture into a Central European culture, that would be genocide. You can't do it, and you would create a state that is simply not sustainable. People need to keep one thing in mind, and that is political unity does not mean cultural singularity. The moment, if hypothetically, the European Union became a federation, the next day, French people won't be force-fed German sausages, and Belgian people will not be told that they have to start speaking Dutch, which I would say they arguably already do. But moving forward, we have to keep in mind here that these cultures need to be kept propped up, they need to be protected, they need to be safeguarded because they're beautiful in each and every one of their own ways. So, in conclusion, what can we see here? We can see that Europe has many historical books and places from which it can actually look and how to deal with the amount of crises it already has. And I want you to keep one thing in mind. And that is, imagine if a cooperative federal Europe became a big powerhouse in the world and it stayed there. What would that show the rest of the world? It will show that these multiple different cultures, these multiple different histories, these multiple different traditions can stand here and work together and cooperate to create something beautiful. So basically, this would show the world that different cultures can work together, and we could actually be moving forward to a cooperative, united, and peaceful world. And Europe will once again be the leaders of this world. Thank you very much.